Start with a partner award. And I think, as a lot of you know, partners are key to integration, and they're creating some amazing tools and a lot of innovation in the space. So Wesley Coelho is going to recognize our partners. Give me the microphone. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, Nick. Wesley has our first two partner awards. This first award goes to a partner that truly represents the spirit of open collaboration that we highly value at Tasktop. And this award goes to TX3 Services. All right. So I'd like to invite Troy Logan to come up and receive the award. All right, thanks, Wesley. So next we have Carmen Diardo, who I think many of you know. He learned basically a better way to do things at Bell Labs, and he's been trying to recreate that way at Nationwide, at Tasktop, and with many of our customers. So Carmen's going to speak to you about breaking down the flow framework. I'll chime in here and there with some stories as well. But I think Carmen's work at Nationwide was actually a lot of the inspiration for the flow framework, where we tried to deploy things like measuring lead time and learned many things as part of that journey. And you'll actually be hearing from Nationwide shortly as well. So with that, I'll have Carmen start breaking things down.
Okay. Thank you. I'll try not to block the screen, because that's more important than looking at me. So, but I don't have the clicker, but that's okay, Mick. And Cap is going to make fun of me because I'm sure I'm not going to do this right, because I have a history of this. So, breaking down the flow framework. So what's the problem, right? I mean, we talked to a lot of people, and you know, we have Agile going on, we have all the cool stuff Dave talked about, right? We have all this cool technology, right? Dockers, Kubernetes, CI/CD, all this cool stuff, right? Sometimes, like in an ITSM world, they care about certified processes, but our business still doesn't seem happy with what's going on, right? And generally, the business has one question, which is like, where's our stuff, right? Because in the language of the business, that's not really important if we're doing Agile or we're doing new technologies. It's where's the value of what I'm producing? So if you actually look at the way a lot of companies start, including, you know, our journey at Nationwide, which when I was there was started around 2008, you start somewhere, and you typically start with something CI/CD or Agile related. And that's a good place to start. But, you know, that's not the end of the journey. It's kind of like Churchill, right? It's not the end, it's not even the beginning of the end. Maybe it's the end of the beginning, right? DevOps, a lot of the focus is on the right-hand side of the value stream. It's around code to cloud. And that's necessary. And you can get a lot of help over there, right? There's a lot of people that will help you get to the cloud. But again, that's still not the entire story, because you have all of this stuff happening close to the business where we don't have visibility into the work. We don't understand work flowing. I mean, we did an estimate when I was still at Nationwide that half of our time was spent before a card ever got in the backlog of an Agile team. So even if we were perfect from code to cloud, from code commit or the backlog of our Agile team, how about all this stuff on the left, right? And as Dominica always talks about, you know, if you don't have visibility, you're not really going to understand how to increase speed or flow. Now, this is something I stole from John Smart from when he was at Barclays, and he gave us permission. It's like, yeah, we're Agile, right? And this builds on what Dave said around, you know, water scrum fall, which I actually never realized. I use it all the time. I didn't realize, never credited Dave for it. So, I owe him like $1 million in royalty or pounds or something. Anyway, I mean, I think you get the point, right? I mean, you can't just be Agile in part of your process. And it's not even just the right-hand side. It's all those things that are happening on the left-hand side. So, what are some of the common problems? And Mick does a great job of talking about this in the book, right? But it starts with a disconnection between IT and the business. We don't really speak the language of the business. Jeff Bezos talks about proxy metrics. We use proxy metrics like, well, we've trained a bunch of people in Agile, or we've trained a bunch of people in something. Again, does that really resonate with the business, right? Mick, talks a lot about the whole project model and funding and a lot of the ways we do things, right? The way we form teams and then we reform teams around projects rather than bringing work to the teams and having this team be continuously working on a product model. And a lot of what we did, I think, in the beginning was, well, let's try to change something, but heaven forbid we talk to the business, right? Because then, that's going to be a problem. The finances will have to change, and don't let the auditors know what we're doing. So we almost kept a separate set of books, right? It's like, well, we're going to do all this stuff, but we're still going to report everything like nothing has changed. Well, that doesn't work, and that brings in a lot of the waste, that was talked about here, right? And then fundamentally, it's this black box. It's like, what's going on? Where's my stuff? And I think it is then led into what I think is the most critical problem, which is IT can't get out of this vision from the business of being a cost center. Right? Jeffrey Stover gave a great talk at the last DevOps Enterprise Summit, and he said, if you're being looked upon as a cost center, people are going to want to control your costs. If you're looked upon as a value center, they're going to want to invest in you. And you can see the difference, right, in the companies that have made it through the turning point. Those companies are ones where IT is an investment, right? I was at a meeting where with a customer, and it was like, well, we have a lot of cost pressures, right? It's like, well, think about this, right? If you were buying stock in companies, would you want them spending less on IT or more on IT? Now, it has to be smart. You have to spend it smart, but it's not about a cost model. And we need to find a way to get out of that. And I think Mick's book and the whole project to product, provides a great way to do that. So I guess Mick's going to come up when it's time for him to talk. I forget. But we practiced this. I don't know. I just wasn't paying attention. So Mick created this thing, right, the flow framework, right? And it's really about these two components. And so throughout today, you're actually going to get treated to 3 different sessions. I don't know if you consider this a treat. To 3 different sessions of 30 minutes where, this is the first one. Then, Jeff Downs is going to help talk about, how we apply this and really focusing on the bottom layer of this integration. Because without connectivity and integration, you really can't have flow, right? I grew up in Pittsburgh, but I moved to Columbus when I worked for Bell Labs, and so, Interstate 70 is a big deal, along with Ohio State, obviously football, but Interstate 70, and I would talk sometimes to my team, and it's like, well, if you want to get to St. Louis, right, people should probably get on 70, but we have teams that are on their own dirt roads. Well, they may get to St. Louis, but it's not the same way, right, as if you're going on a connected path that's been set up for you to go as fast as you can. And then I think the other critical component is that connection to the value streams in the business, right? Because, that connectivity and what I saw as a customer and what got me excited was I felt like there was all these artifacts of how we were doing our work, the ground truth was really in those artifacts and the tools. This is how our work was being done, right? In the features, in the stories, in how the code was being committed and released. But then the top part really provides that alignment across a value stream, a product, and then the business. And I think then that completes, the alignment with the business. So, this is your part, Mac.
So I think the whole goal, as Carmen just said, is that we need this new common language in order for the business side to understand IT as an investment and to understand, again, everyone I think is already trying to make their organizations an innovator in this world that they've just described, because if you can't innovate around software, there's a good chance you won't make it through the turning point. Your organization will decline. We've already had enough of those examples, so through digital disruption. So I think there's no lack of sense of urgency. There's just an inability to do the right things that I think is still plaguing many of our organizations, because some of the silver bullets that people look for, they might just not apply. Agile in itself is not a silver bullet. Scaled Agile framework has some great concepts, not a silver bullet. We've got great technical practices and team practices like Scrum, like DevOps, but again, those alone are not enough. And very importantly, what we've realized, and I think what a lot of you have realized, is they're not the same language that the business speaks when they're thinking of investments. They're still thinking in terms of org charts, and they're still thinking in terms of Gantt charts. And what we've learned and what Project to Product is about is that those are the wrong tools for helping you become a software innovator. And the right tools are actually a lot more like the things we've learned from Scrum, from DevOps, and so on. So the goal of the Flow framework, and I think really framing this in that amazing presentation that you saw from Select Medical will make it a bit more concrete. The goal of the Flow framework is to give you a roadmap for helping your organization go through this transition, whether it's because you're rolling out new tools, you want to connect that new Agile tool, that new DevOps tool, or your business wants that new kind of level of visibility. And so when you think about what Select Medical did, they focused on taking that tool chain, so that this group was responsible for the tool chain, for bringing the new tools, the TFS and ServiceNow and so on, and they realized that at that lowest level, they needed to connect those tools. And we realized, of course, and this is a big part of the story, is that these tools themselves are complex because they're becoming increasingly specialized. Some are very good for regulated product development. Some are very good for things you still need to do, like ITIL, as in the case of ServiceNow. And some are the most lightweight and team-centric Agile tools that keep developers in the flow of the code. So Select Medical was able to take that Tasktop Integration Hub and connect that layer. And then I think you heard a pretty amazing thing happen, because as soon as that artifact network, as soon as they were not talking about a specific artifact in a specific tool, they were actually talking about tickets and incidents, they realized they had that visibility. They had that direct visibility of the value stream, so they could say they made the work for some of their teams completely impossible. They were delaying hospitals because they doubled up the kinds of incidents a team was seeing. So it's that kind of visibility that we're after. And I think the big thing is allowing that to inform business results, whether it's to give those teams working on your product value streams the autonomy they need to deliver more, or knowing where to invest, where they're blocked, where the dependencies between those value streams are. And so I'll take you really quickly through what the Flow framework is, and we'll be going into depth on some of these things. So at its core, there are these 4 flow items. I'll go into detail in a moment, but we're going to look at the very top first, and you've got these 4 flow metrics. So flow velocity, how much you're delivering per unit time, for a release, for a year, for a sprint, and so on. Flow efficiency, how efficiently you're doing that, how long things are waiting, rather than actually being worked on, how long things are stuck, how long people are stuck on various kinds of dependencies within the organization, waiting on things. Flow time, how long it takes you to deliver something, to bring that new feature to market, to roll out something like, say, Epic at a hospital. And flow load, which you'll hear Dominica Granda speak a lot, is she's an expert in it from her book, Making Work Visible. How much work in progress is getting in the way of your teams by you having overloaded your value stream. So we'll be telling you some of those stories. And the really important thing is, as you'll see in the Flow framework, it's all about connecting this to business results. So we've learned, and the whole story of Project to Product, and what Carmen just related, is that if you manage your IT to cost alone, you'll just get better and better at reducing costs. You won't actually get through your transformation. So, and of course, people will always be scrutinizing your costs, as Carmen just pointed out. But if we can relate the work that's being done in our value streams by our teams to business value and make sure that that business value is specified, that's really core of the Flow framework and why we actually call these things value streams. So you actually specify for each product, and whether that's an internal product, it's an SDK that you're making, a framework, a billing system, an external customer-facing product, every product you specify value for, and you correlate these flows to that value. You specify cost per value stream, so that you know, for example, that this value stream is delivering more value at lower cost, let's invest. This is a place where we've actually experimented with a cloud-native solution and actually is giving us more velocity. quality for each value stream, and then this really important thing that gets back to some of Dave's points of the happiness of the people working on that value stream. And this is not the happiness of that we think of, such as employee net promoter scores or employee satisfaction scores for an org chart. How happy are my infrastructure people? How happy is my support team? How happy are my developers? This is how happy are the people working on this value stream, on this product, because we know we need to be cross-functional. We need to build on things like feature teams. And what we really care about as an organizational unit is those product value streams. So we need to measure those and know that if this team is so overloaded and they're working on an architecture that can't possibly implement those features the business wants efficiently, well, maybe we need to give them some room because in order to re-architect, in order to reduce technical debt, because we're seeing their satisfaction drop and drop and drop as that technical debt rises and their frustration increases. So this is really a new kind of lens for looking at your product value streams as an investment portfolio, again, rather than a cost center. And they're looking at them on a flow-based way rather than this project management approach of whether they're on time and on budget, even if you actually have to fit this into an existing project management model or a client engagement model. So that's the very top of the flow framework. And the core thing about that is asking ourselves what flows in software delivery. And you'll hear these concepts from some of the more technical talks as well. We heard from Select Medical how they thought about the artifacts and what artifacts connected their different teams. But what we've realized is that some of those artifacts, like the 60 or 70 different work item types you have in a scaled agile framework, those are the kinds of things that make the business people's eyes gloss over. When I first told my CFO that it was really important for us to measure story points and he needed to understand that, he looked at me like I had horns on my head and was dressed in a pink polka dot suit, because it's not his language. So we have there's quite a few stuffed unicorns that Neelan's put into our offices for some reason. So that was not his language, whereas value and cost and P&L and actually project accounting are his language. So what we've realized through this journey is that we need to basically create a more abstract, a higher level view of the things flowing through the tools that you use and things that can be related to the business. Because in the end, what we want to do is help teams do great work by increasing the flow of business value, by removing their impediments, which in the end will also make them happier. So the flow framework has just 4 units of flow. And the units of flow are all about what the customer pulls, whether it's an internal customer, an external customer, different stakeholder in your business, a business partner. And the first flow unit is features. So customers no longer pull releases. Releases are meaningless in the world of cloud and software as a service. But customers do want features. If you think what made you switch to that different app, that different provider, it's because it gave you some other benefit. And so what we're really pulling through software, which is why software has to continue to evolve, is new features. And that's how everyone is competing on digital experiences, is just making a better and better experience. So features are somehow key to what's being pulled by customers. Defect, so making sure this stuff works, will also make a customer either engage or disengage from a product, a digital experience. Risks are a first-class part of the flow framework, because the world that we're living in today of security, of data privacy, we realize that this is as important to prioritize at a business level as features and defects. And we've also learned over the course of the last 20 years how important this concept of debts, technical debts, infrastructure debts with your value streams is to software as well. So the very important thing with these 4 flow items is that they're mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive. In other words, they cover all work that happens across all your teams. And what this means is, if you're asking your teams to implement regulatory support, GDPR, to reduce your risks or security work, you are taking away from their ability to deliver features. And well-run businesses, those innovators that they've talked about, they understand that at a business level. Whereas some organizations or some business leaders who've not come from a software background and who are more used to the Gantt and PERT charts don't see that these things are a zero-sum game, that these are levers that the business actually needs to understand, that you can't expect your teams to both dramatically ramp up their work on risk reduction and implement GDPR while they're needing to fix defects, and then expect them to have this very big feature flow. So we'll show you some of that going in. But I'll give you a really quick illustration of this. After Gene read the book, he said, you need, for executives, you need to simplify this even more. And he challenged me to express it entirely with up and down arrows. So I thought that he said executives only understand up and down arrows. So I said, fine, let's try, let's try it. So here's the attempt at illustrating the flow framework with up and down arrows, and it's probably more effective than anything in the book, interestingly, from the reception it gets. But this is, think of the last time you had a big push to market. You were trying to deliver a significant new product. And think about maybe how some traditional business leaders think, and think about how some, your product managers, your engineering managers, people who understand software think about this. So typically, the success of that product, of that new launch, of that new offering that you're creating will be defined by all the great features that you put into it. So there's a big focus on those features for very good reasons. Those are the business value. When that happens, because these things are a zero-sum game, the number of debts in your backlogs, the number of risks in your backlogs will increase because of that feature focus. And again, you can't do both. It is a zero-sum game. Quality will get reduced because you're adding more and more without taking the time to fix things. And for those of you who've been part of this gets to be a really frustrating situation at some point as defect work actually starts going up because you can't not fix things as you're headed towards release or released. And then just many of us have experienced this death spiral, where after that release, the defect work just consumes everything, consumes all of the team's time, and feature work basically goes down to zero. And the business is frustrated. They don't understand why this is happening, because again, they did not have a model for this that worked. The idea was, okay, you have a release, then we're done. It's 20% of the team's time is going to maintenance, and let's assign them to these 8 other projects. Everything will be fine. There's something completely flawed about that model in terms of how we apply it to software. It works for building dams, for building buildings. It works for building data centers, that you have a release and you're done. You reduce your investment. That's not what software innovators do. That's not what the tech giants do. So now think about how, this is now 2003. This is Bill Gates at the helm of Microsoft, and he releases this memo, or leaks, this memo leaks, the trustworthy computing memo after the SQL Slammer fiasco. So Microsoft realized at this point, and this is again 2003, before all these breaches that we see on what seems like a weekly basis of all our own personal information through most recently Marion and others, in the trustworthy computing memo, he says, we need to change what we're doing. We're going to freeze all feature work across all of Microsoft's products value streams in order to become trustworthy, to reduce our security debts, and to invest in security. And they did exactly that. Just imagine how difficult that would be at that scale to steer that whole ship and stop feature work while, of course, the competition is doing other feature work. But they did that across the organization. Debts and risks went down, and they were able to innovate to move quickly towards cloud, and are today, at least for a little while, the most valuable company in the world. So this worked. And their complexity at Microsoft, this is not a Twitter where they've got one internet scale product. We're talking about massive complexity, 50 years of legacy. And again, this kind of thinking, helping them steer through these changes and actually through this turning point. So Carmen, why don't you tell us how we can actually measure?
Okay, thanks, Mick. So, when we started, went through Agile and Lean and things, we got value out of that, right? I think Agile got us predictability and quality, Lean got us efficiency, but neither the way we had implemented them actually got us speed, not end-to-end speed, right? And so when we started to focus on speed, one of the questions was, well, how will we know if we got any faster if we don't measure how fast we're going now, right? Yet, when I asked the question, well, no, I get my talks mixed up, so this isn't this talk. I asked this question at Southern Fried Agile a couple weeks ago, and there was about 200 folks in the room. It's in Charlotte, big banks, Fortune 500, and I asked them 2 questions, right? One was, do you treat your integrated pipeline as a product, which I think is a separate item that if you want to talk to me about, I'd be glad to, and nobody raised their hand, right? And then the second thing was, how many folks here know how long it takes to deliver, from beginning to end, a feature or even a defect? And again, there was no, maybe some people were shy, but nobody raised their hand, right? But you could tell by the response from the room, people realized they needed this capability, right? Kristen Biloff's going to talk later about Nationwide, and when I was in Nationwide, one of my views was I need to provide folks like Kristen and Scrum Masters and teams some metrics, right? Because they'll come up with great ideas and experiments they can run, but if they don't have a way to baseline where they are and then say, did this make us better, as Mick talked about, you really can't get any headway through the executive political structure you have to show, yes, demonstrably this made a difference, right? So just one metric, lead time or flow time as Mick describes it, made a big difference just in one of those items, which was in our case stories, because it put a light on things that I think people knew intrinsically on the team, but we never had the data to actually communicate that to our leadership, right? So, and then, how much time, again, for defects. And then I think the third one, which is very important, that Mick talked about, which is, what is our distribution of work? Because in a project model, right, the focus is, and the incentives are around features, scope, right? I would guess most business leaders believe that if they have a team of 12 people are working on features, right? They don't get that, well, wait, I'm not getting 12 people's work of capacity? My clarity allocation says I am, so, that's gold, right? In the State of the DevOps report, the latest one talked about elite performers still are less than 60% of their focus is on features. And so, project managers were not incented to spend time on the fact that my struts library needed upgrade. Who wants to pay for that? That's some application owner, no, work on my features, right? The whole risk items, right? And then especially debt, because debt is an investment in the future. Debt is not going to make this thing go faster, probably. It's going to make the next thing go faster. And so we were not even incented, and we weren't looking at this in the right way. And so we couldn't really even have the discussion with the business on the prioritization for this product, right? Because this product is going to be here forever. This is what we're investing in. Projects come and go. It's these products that are our lifeblood of our business and what we're delivering to our customers. So I'm briefly going to go through this because, in the third session today, Mick and Dominica are going to dive deep into these concepts. But, flow time, right? And so, flow time really starts, there's lead time and flow time. Dominica will talk about that. From the time you decide you're going to work on work until you've deployed it, right? And it's across all these 4 types of items. So, that gives you a baseline. That gives you a way to show and ask the question, how can we go faster? Right? That should be a question in every retrospective the teams are having. What is slowing us down? What are we waiting for? My guess is it's probably not your development pairs working on your code, right? I think what we found, and what Dominica talks about is it's really more about these wait times. It's where you're waiting for something. I'm waiting for infrastructure. I'm waiting for a shared service like performance or security, right? I'm waiting for another team, the dependencies that Dave talked about, which I think there's ways, I think something like inner sourcing is a way to get around and allow teams to get into code bases. Maybe if you haven't heard of it, something to look into. Flow distribution, I just talked about this. And there's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer here, right? It's a discussion point because every value stream at a different point in its life may have a different profile, and that's okay. The question is, do you really understand it, and can you align with your business? Can you have a conversation about this? And then flow efficiency, which again gets back to, what are these wait states, right? Most of our time, when we start to measure this, what we're going to find is it's in waiting. I think I'm convinced, Dominica's convinced about that. It's really in the waiting time. So if we don't understand what our bottlenecks are and we don't understand what we're waiting for, how do the C-levels really know what to invest in? So again, the idea is to get answers to these questions, to help have those discussions with the business, and also help baseline any improvements that we want to do. And then, I think Mick is going to talk later in a session about the dashboard and how we use this at Tasktop and how it's affected some of the decisions he's made on balancing work and distribution of work and WIP and things of that nature. So we really want to go from these silos and these proxy metrics, to a connected value stream network. And as I said, we'll be talking more about that in the other two sessions. Mick's going to wrap this up.
Yeah, and I think, so the goal of the book, and I think why we're so excited about the traction of the book, is it does identify these new kind of metrics. And the thing that's different about these metrics is that they're all end-to-end metrics, and they're all relevant to the business. They're about how quickly, how well, and how efficiently we're delivering value. So the reason that I think we've been stuck in this world of proxy metrics is that the end-to-end metrics have been so hard to measure. They're critical. So a mature automotive supplier knows that the end-to-end lead time from when they take a custom order for a car to when that car gets the customer is the #1 predictor of their revenue performance. Yet we don't measure those things at all. Most organizations have no sense. The nationwide journey of Nationwide, again, as an innovator on this front, of measuring lead time just unearthed some amazing things. And there are very few organizations outside of the tech giants who've created their own tool chains, right? Organizations like Microsoft have 2,500 developers working on their delivery pipelines and tools. This is something that's just not feasible for the rest of the world's organizations. The rest of the world's organizations, we must take these innovative tools provided by vendors, provided by open source products as well, and we have to connect them. And because of how hard that's been, these metrics like deploys per day that are very easy to measure get over-focused on. Because in the end, deploys per day, you can't tell your leader how much more business value delivered. Is it better to have 100 deploys per day or 10? It's very hard to know. And if deploys per day are not the bottleneck, and of course you do need continuous integration, continuous delivery. These things are critical practices, and they will become a bottleneck eventually. But if your bottleneck is further upstream, as we've learned in many organizations, and you've got one user experience designer for 100 developers, whereas every tech giant has one for 5, guess what? Your bottleneck might be there. So this practice of actually, first of all, collecting these metrics is not that hard in the sense that you've got endless BI tools and big data tools and enterprise reporting people. So actually collecting the data from those tools is not hard. Collecting end-to-end data that's meaningful and connected and correlated is impossible without a connected value stream network. And connecting these value stream networks at your scale, at your size, and with the complexity of your tool chains has been the bottleneck. So I think we've seen from Select Medical how they succeeded with it. In a moment, we're going to see from TIA how they've done that as well, and the level of sophistication that's needed to do it within the organizations at their scale. So with that, we'll wrap up. So thank you. Thank you, Carmen. And we'll bring up Mark Ford to show us just the level of sophistication that's needed in order to connect the value stream network so you can get this kind of visibility and these end-to-end flow metrics.